Hello, and welcome to the Make Ideas Reality Podcast. Tell me the facts and I'll learn. Tell me the truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever. Storytelling is the key to a successful project. Whether we realize it or not, we are always telling stories. On our first date, on an Instagram post, or with friends and family, we are constantly narrating events and interpreting emotions and actions. It's how we communicate as humans. That's why storytelling is so important for sharing your work and projects. But how do we tell a story about a project? And how will that way of communicating engage and inspire our audience? Well, my guest today is Matthew Dix, 5 times Moth Grand Slam storytelling champion, author of 6 novels and the book with possibly the longest title in the whole entire world, Storyworthy, Engage, Teach, Persuade, and Change Your Life Through the Power of Storytelling. In today's show, Matt walks us through how we can tell a compelling story. We then discuss the don'ts of storytelling and ways to generate story ideas using a tool he calls Homework for Life. And we finish with Matthew deconstructing one of my latest project videos. Oh God, it gets nasty, trust me. So you guys can learn from my example what to do and what not to do. This show is jam-packed with actionable advice, so please get ready to take notes. Now let's get into the show. Sitting in jail for a crime he did not commit. I'm a teacher now. No, blackmailed, unfit. A story that could leave one with an addiction. Instead, a man with a storytelling affliction. Welcome to the show, Matthew Dix.
That was pretty good. Thank you very much.
I'm glad you thought it was good. I was a bit nervous about that
one. Well, it's interesting to hear a poem about your life or a little portion of your life. So yeah, I liked it.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to expand on that, some of that stuff in that poem later.
Sure.
It might be another podcast. Who knows? Welcome to the show, Matthew. I was wondering, there's most of the people listening right now have no clue who you are. So I want to give you the opportunity to tell them sort of who you are and what you are or what you do, and maybe a little bit more in depth than I possibly could do it.
Sure. It's always a tricky question because I sort of have a bunch of different things that I do. I'm an elementary school teacher. Actually, I just finished teaching 5th graders a little while ago. So I always think that's my primary goal in life or my primary job because little people are depending upon me. But I'm also a writer. So I've published 7 novels and a book of nonfiction, and I have a couple more coming out this year. So for a long time, I've been committing words to a page. I'm also a storyteller. So I stand on stages all over the world and I tell personal stories about my life, and I do keynotes and talks and all those kinds of things as well. And that sort of has caused me to unexpectedly fall into the world of consulting. So now I work with Fortune 100 companies on marketing plans and advertising campaigns. And I work with CEOs on, big speeches they're planning on giving, and with the clergy and everyone you can imagine, truly. Santa Clauses before the pandemic came and met with me and wanted to tell better stories to the kids sitting on their laps in the mall so that they could get that kid off the lap quicker, because a story will make a kid smile and a smile will get a picture. And then you get another kid on the lap and the mall line goes quicker while you're waiting to sit on Santa's lap. So,
wow.
Yeah. So all of those kinds of things. I also minister weddings and things like that, although that's surprising because my belief in God is tenuous at best, but it doesn't matter. It turns out if you can tell a good story, you get to be a substitute minister when a minister of a Unitarian Universalist church wants to go to Florida and they need someone who can stand in the pulpit and tell stories and run the show. So I do a lot of things. I often say I work in words, sentences, paragraphs, and words, whether I'm teaching students or performing on stage or doing stand-up comedy or writing a book.
Yeah, I'm always astounded when I like hear about all the things you do. I just like, how does he fit it in? He's a family man too, and
Yes.
got
Most important, I'm a family man. I've got 2 kids, 2 cats, a wife, and I play a lot of golf very poorly.
well, that makes two of us. Now, I brought you on the show because of the impact of one of your books, Storyworthy. It possibly has the longest title in the world. The full title is Storyworthy: Engage, Teach, Persuade, and Change Your Life Through the Power of Storytelling. And this book, has changed the way I have done my work and the way I present my work. Through the lessons I took on board in this book, I feel like my work has been able to mature and be able to connect with my audience. But I've also found that like learning the art of storytelling has impacted me in other ways too. It's made me a better dad and a better husband. I also don't bore the ears off my friends as much anymore. And it probably compensates a lot for my inability to think about nothing else but my work. And I even probably tolerate my own company a lot better as well. So
Yeah, I
I
believe
think
that.
so I think this is a super valuable tool to help you in all aspects of your life. But today we're going to be focusing mainly on us as creators and how storytelling can benefit our work. Now, I want to get right into the thick of it and ask Matthew, our audience is mainly artists and craftspeople, and most post their work on social media and also make perhaps YouTube videos about their work. Why do you think it's important for people like us to be able to storytell, even if it's just about making something physical?
Well, I think there's a whole bunch of reasons, really. One of the most important things I often think about in terms of a creator, now I'm a creator of books, but what I often tell people is if I'm going to do a book talk, for example, if I have a new book coming out and I'm on a book tour, my goal is never really to sell that book. What I try to do is I try to get people to become fans of me. So rather than sitting in front of people and talking about the book or even reading from the book, which is what many authors do, I instead tell stories about the creation of the book, the stumbling blocks along the way, where the idea came from, that moment of insight or the way I unlocked a problem. And people are so much more fascinated in the process of the creation than to listen to me talk about the end product in any way whatsoever. My goal is always to not get them to be excited about this book, but to be excited about me so that whatever I produce, whether it's another book or I stand on a stage or I make a YouTube video or I record a podcast, I want them to be invested in me as a creative spirit and someone who they believe in. And so when we tell stories about not necessarily here's the thing and let me tell you about the thing, but also let me tell you how I made it. Let me tell you the process that it took. Let me tell you how I decided to become the person who would make things like this. Those are the kinds of stories that stay with people. And that's how you turn sort of someone who likes what you made into someone who likes you. And when they like you, they're going to come back for the next thing you make, as opposed to sort of buying your painting and then moving on to some other painter or just another form of art. You want people to like you.
I think that's a good point because I feel like a lot of our, artists and craftsmen and makers, we like to think that the work stands for itself, and that's all that matters.
Well, to a degree, I agree. But like if I think about Starry Night, which is a beautiful painting that I look at often, not my own copy. I don't own Starry Night, but it's lovely.
Yeah.
But what happens is if you learn the story behind Starry Night, you end up looking at it longer and you end up coming back to it more often. and it gains a deeper emotional meaning to you. I remember when my wife and I were in Bermuda on our honeymoon, we went to a glass blower and we watched them do their work. And prior to actually seeing a glass blower do that work, I would look at blown glass and say, that's lovely. That's a nice piece. Maybe we'll get it. Maybe we won't. But after spending an hour in their, I don't know what it's called, the forge, whatever it was, lots of hot stuff and liquid glass. It was amazing. I've always looked at blown glass differently by spending an hour with a person, watching that person do their work and describe what they're doing and talking about themselves along the way, saying how they came into this business and how their father did it before them. So it just changes the way you look at art when you understand what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of people in our community seem to think that the work stands for itself and don't like to show themselves or even talk about themselves or even the decisions they made and why they made them, which is part of the creative process, which I've also found is a lot to do with, my creative process is the story. And so I really love the fact that I've learned this skill now, and I'm constantly improving on it to be able to communicate and hopefully have those people, want to watch Justin rather than watch the next project.
Right. Well, if you just watch the things that are on television, even these days, you could say that food stands on its own. You're served a meal at a restaurant, and it certainly does. And yet you just have to turn on the television to watch all of these shows where either professional chefs are making food or there's a competition between people making food. I saw a show the other day. I was just sort of flipping by it at the gym, and there were people making weapons. I don't know what the show was, but they were like all trying to make swords in banging on iron. And I thought, I'd love to watch that. I don't have time to watch it. I don't want to own a sword. I'm not into weaponry in any way. But the understanding about how these things get made by human beings was fascinating to me. And I'm sure it's fascinating to other people because it's on television. So the idea that you can look at a beautiful thing that has been made is certainly true. But when we know the story behind it, or we know the creator behind the thing that we're holding or touching, that's a whole different story.
Yeah, I think about 1,000 of my listeners right now just yelled at their at their phone because they're like, "Don't you know that show?"
No, I don't. What's it called?
They're gonna hate me because I don't know what it's called either because I'm not a blacksmith. So,
yeah, whatever it is, it was interesting enough that as I walked by, I went, "Oh, look at that! I should watch that sometime."
I have a feeling it's Forge and Fire. I think that's what it's called. But
that's a good name. Yeah, let's call it that. That's a good name.
All right. I'd like to go a little bit into the next question with a quote from your book. Your quote says, "You need not spend time in jail or crash through a windshield or have a gun jammed against the side of your head to tell a great story. The simplest stories about the smallest moments in our lives are often the most compelling." I wondered if you could explain that quote for us.
Sure. Well, the three things you led with are all three things that have happened to me. And it's the why. It's the why behind why I decided to start storytelling. My friends told me I've lived the worst life of anyone they know. So go to New York and start telling stories, which is not a nice thing to say to your friend, and not true. I've had a weird, unexpected life full of misfortune, but I'm certainly happy with who I am and how things have turned out. But what I discovered going through storytelling, sort of traveling down the road of storytelling, is that if I tell you the story about the time I went through the windshield of a car when I was 17 and stopped breathing and my heart stopped beating and paramedics had to restore my life, it's very difficult for me to connect to you on a real emotional level. You can't relate to that story unless you too have gone through a windshield and died in the back of an ambulance before a woman brought you back to life. So that's a very challenging story to tell. Now, it's a story I do tell, but when I tell those big stories, those outrageous stories, I always have to find small singular moments that will connect to the audience. But what's much easier to do is to just tell a small story. Find a moment in your life that meant something to you, something that really resonated in even a small way. And when we tell those stories, they're so more likely to connect with the audience, because those are moments that people are more likely to have experienced or to have watched someone else experience. So when we tell the small stories of our lives, we're more likely to make an emotional connection with our audience, and we're more likely to have lots of stories to tell. And I'm a big believer in having many, many, many stories to tell. The best storytellers of the world are the people who have the most stories to tell. So you really want a lot of content. You want a lot of stories to be able to bring out into the world, and telling small stories is a great way to do it.
I just want to say, the power of storytelling is really real, because you mentioned the story you told about the windshield incident. And like, I started remembering my emotional reaction to that story, and it's stuck with me. And
Yeah.
like, I haven't flown through a windshield. I haven't ever experienced that. But the way you told that story made me, I don't know. I can't remember if I actually cried or I felt like I was going to cry, or just like had that big lump in my chest and throat. But I felt it, and I never forgot that. And so I think that's the power of being able to find those small moments that can connect with other humans. And then that's stuck with me. I can't get that story out of my head. If I could tell it as good as you, I would. But but I think it made a real impact, and it shows me the power of storytelling.
Yeah, well, stories are the things we remember. We're wired for story, because before we could write, as human beings, as a species, we had to tell stories about, don't eat the berries from this bush because it killed Uncle John. Eat the berries from this bush because they taste good. Don't go into that valley. It's full of tigers. Those are the kinds of things we had to do. And we relied on story in order to sort of survive, to pass information down before we could do it in the written form. And so we're wired to remember stories. It's why we remember movies so well. It's why you'll watch the same movie 20 times in your life, even though you know exactly what's going to happen at every turn. They're so entertaining, and they're so emotionally resonant, even after we've seen it a few times. You can cry at the same movie over and over again, even though there's no surprise left. And you could probably quote the lines perfectly. It's just, that's how stories work. And so the more we can incorporate them, the more we can connect with other people.
Now, we talked a little bit about, finding the small moments, but how do you find the small moments? Is there a trick to finding something to tell a story about?
Well, I mean, the good news is that everyone has a ton of stories to tell. I meet a lot of people who tell me, yeah, but I'm the one who doesn't. And I always think, really, you think you're that special? You think you're the one unicorn in the world walking around without stories? So everyone has them to tell. The problem is one of two things. We either don't see them because we haven't trained ourselves to be watchful and attentive to our own lives, or when we do see them, we take note of them for a moment and then we move past them as if they're worthless. And what happens ultimately is, we're older, we're 50, we look back on our life and we think, my God, where did all the time go? How did my kid grow up so quickly? None of those things are true. Time does not go by quickly. You just have to sit in a DMV for an hour. Tell me that time goes by quickly. It doesn't go by quickly. We just don't take the time to remember things.
Yeah.
And so, I have a lot of strategies I use to find stories, but the one that works the best for me, the one that resonates the most with so many people, is homework for life. This process that I began because I didn't want to be a storyteller who told the same story every night. I know those guys, they go on stage and they've got 12 stories, and when they start talking, I go, yeah, I know this one too. I didn't want to be that guy. So like last night I was in New York performing, and it was a brand new story, which is what I want every time I take the stage. So in order to do that, as I started to panic and I realized I was going to run out of stories, I gave myself this homework assignment first. I was the first one to ever do it. And because I'm an elementary school teacher, it's sort of my inclination to just give homework. That is what I do instinctually. So all I did, and all I tell people to do, even if you don't want to tell stories, you should do this because it's going to change your life. I tell people, at the end of every day, you sit down and you reflect upon your day and you ask yourself, what's the most story-worthy moment from the day? Even if the day doesn't actually contain anything that's really inherently story-worthy. The question I always give to myself really is this: if someone kidnapped my family and they said, you can't have your family back until you tell us a story about something that took place over the last 24 hours, what would that story be? And I force myself to find something, even if it's nothing I would ever tell out loud to people. And then I write it down. I don't write the whole story down because that's crazy. Those are journalers. Those are people who love to write page after page after page of their lives. And, after someone has broken up with them. And then when they find love again, they tend to put the journal away. What I do is I take an Excel spreadsheet, a simple spreadsheet or sheets in Google Docs. And it's 2 columns. It's the left column, which has the date. And then I stretch that second column across the screen. And in that second column, I write down my story. So all I do is give myself, 3, 4, 5 sentences to capture the moment. And my goal was to get 1 news story every month, 12 news stories every year. I thought that would have been fantastic. What happens instead, and not just for me, for every person who really commits to it, we discovered that we have more stories in our lives than we ever realized. That throughout our days, people are saying things and doing things, and we are seeing things and doing things that are changing us in small and tiny ways that make for great stories. And so the more you do homework for life, the more often you do it, especially on days when there's really nothing to be told and you have to find something, eventually what happens is you form this sort of storytelling lens where you see your life in a different light. So even if the only audience you have for storytelling is yourself, even if the only person you want to tell stories to is yourself, that's the first and most important audience you have. But what will happen over time is you'll just suddenly discover that your life is filled with stories that are worth telling, worth remembering, worth preserving, worth crafting, all of these things.
Yeah, I'm just looking at my phone right now because I brought up my homework for life, which I started in February of 2021 and stopped in March.
So you didn't give yourself much of a chance.
No, I didn't. But saying that, one of the ones here I'm about to read, I wrote, watched a crazy Norwegian kids naked body game show.
I know that show.
Emma complimented on my penis, different cultural upbringing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's 100% story in that. Like I could see right now where I could go with that.
And the tragedy is you would forget it eventually if you didn't write it down.
Well, I have forgotten. I just read it now and I remembered it. And
that's how we live our lives. We forget everything.
Yeah. So there's a whole heap of others in there. Some of them not story worthy, I think, but then all of a sudden you get one that you just really resonates. And I think that can be the same with your projects. There's a reason behind you doing a project. There's like building something, and often there's those small stories behind it. So I think this homework for life could be really valuable, and I need to be better to get back on it. My apologies, Matthew, by the way.
Well, I just think it makes you a happier person as well. I think that what happens in our lives is people don't think about themselves enough. That sounds weird, but I think storytellers are slightly self-centered in a positive way, meaning we're deeply curious about ourselves. I think most people in the world, most decent people, tend to spend most of their time thinking about their kids, their spouse, their pets, their parents, their colleagues, their work. But they don't often sit down and just say, why am I the way I am? Why do I do the things that I do? Why is that thing from the past still popping up in my mind today, even though it was 20 years ago? And when we start doing that, when we allow ourselves to be curious about ourselves, I think even if we're never going to tell those stories to anyone in our lives, it makes us better people. It makes us happier people. And it makes us feel like our lives are more complete, which is the tragedy is, I think, that moment that you would have forgotten if you hadn't written it down. That's the tragedy, I think, because there's nothing worse than having a really deep and profound and meaningful moment with someone you love. And then not having it anymore 6 months later. And so
Mm.
that doesn't happen for me anymore. It hasn't happened to me for 10 years, as long as I've been doing homework for life. And the other thing I'll mention about homework for life is as you start to do it, the other thing that happens is it's going to sort of crack you open. And as you start thinking about your own life, suddenly memories from the past will start rising up and they get entered into my homework for life too. So although I tell you at the end of the day, I enter my homework for life, and that's not really true anymore. If my computer's around or my phone's around, when I have a moment, it immediately gets written down.
Mm.
And if I suddenly remember something from my past, that also enters homework for life. So my average day has about 5 entries per day. Now, that doesn't mean it's 5 stories. Only about 10% of the things I write down become stories from my homework for life. So 90% of what I'm writing down, I never tell anyone, but I'm so happy I have all of it, because even if I'm not speaking about it on a stage or telling my wife about it, I'm holding on to the moments in my life that I see as precious.
Now, there's probably a lot of people sitting, listening to this thinking, "Ugh, I couldn't be stuffed." But what's the hack to finding a bit of a story, in for my projects, is there something that you can use just as a simple format?
It's an activity I do. It's called first, last, best, worst. And that's the idea that many of the best stories of our lives come from the first time we do something, the last time, the best time, or the worst time. So like if you just write first, last, best, worst across the top of the paper, I'll give you a topic like kiss. And then you would write down your first kiss. And you just have to write the name of the person if you remember it. So for me, it's Laura. Right. So first, and then the last kiss, which is Charlie, my son, just gave me a kiss before I stepped into the office. And then my best kiss, which is probably a tie between Laura and my wife. And then my worst kiss, which was a girl named Kim. So I remember all 4 of those kisses. And I say, are any of them stories? Well, it turns out 3 of them are. Right. So you can use kiss and, easy ones like teacher and car, anything that sort of engenders stories, friend, enemy, but you can use anything. I look around my office right now. I'm just looking at a table full of stuff. I'm just looking for a new thing that I've never used before. So ice cream cone. I have a sculpture of an ice cream cone here that was given to me for Father's Day. And so I would say, well, what's the first ice cream cone I can think of ever having? Right. And I actually can remember going to Little League games. And if we won, we would get an ice cream cone at the little shop next to the pharmacy. Now that memory just came back to me, completely lost for 40 years of my life. And now I have that memory of going in the back of a pickup truck after a victory on the Little League field and getting ice cream. And now it occurs to me that's my son, who lost every single game of his last Little League season, still got ice cream every time. And now I have a story, because I have you've got to win. You fight to the death in the dirt for ice cream. And my son loses every game and gets ice cream all the time. So now I found a story, and that's just with the first one. So now I got to think about my last ice cream, my best ice cream, and my worst ice cream. I'm probably going to find stories. So you can do it with almost anything. Sometimes you might not fill in one of them. You might not be able to remember your first whatever or your last whatever, but you fill in as many as you can and suddenly you find stories. When we're done here, I'm going to add to my homework for life. Used to go to the little ice cream shack next to the pharmacy only if we won a baseball game, in the back of the pickup truck. That's a memory that's back to me. And that's what I talk about, making your life feel more fulfilling and more complete. Because now I have a childhood memory that I had lost, and now it's back, and childhood suddenly feels a little richer than it did a minute ago.
Yeah, because I imagine for my listeners, you could use things like, you just open your tool drawers and you first knife you ever owned that you remember, right? And someone's thinking about a pocket knife, maybe they got given as a child, and so then maybe they can turn that into a project and be able to storytell the fact that they had this pocket knife as a child, and maybe they even still have it to this day. And they want to use that pocket knife to make something, whittle a spoon or something, whatever it is. But that in itself is a story about the first pocket knife you ever had, for example.
Yeah, I just did that one in my head, and I have a story for the first. and for the last. I can't find my best and worst yet, but I would spend some time. But even those who aren't making things with knives, I can still, we all had pocket knives probably at some point in our life. So yeah, it works. And it will tell the story of the thing that you're trying to tell a story of. I do the same thing with my books, right? So when I'm getting ready to tell the story of the creation of my book, I will do these same kinds of exercises to find these moments that I'm going to talk about when I'm speaking to people.
Let's get into storytelling. How do we actually tell a good story? Can you break it down for us?
Sure. I guess the first thing we have to understand is what really is a story. Oftentimes people think that reporting on their life constitutes a story. In other words, I'm going to tell you some stuff that happened chronologically over a period of time, and therefore I will have told you a story. And that's just not the case. It's often bad, and people don't want to hear a chronology of your life. A story really is about a moment of change. I call them 5-second moments because I think that these moments happen in almost a singular moment, a sort of instantaneous change. They come in two forms. It's either you transform, which means I used to be one kind of person and now I'm a different kind of person, or more likely realization, meaning I used to think something and now I think a different thing. It doesn't have to be big. It can really be a very subtle change. But that's what it constitutes a story. Any movie you watch, any book you read, they're all about a protagonist, or in this case, you, encountering something in the world that causes you to somehow change willingly or unwillingly. And that's why, that's why I can ruin movies for people is in the first 15 minutes of a movie, just pay attention to the main character or the main characters, and you will know how the movie's going to end, because in the first 15 minutes, they're going to present the problem, the flaw, the thing that needs to be fixed in that protagonist, so that the end of the story, that is going to sort of, that's going to be how the movie comes to an end. It doesn't mean you're going to know the particulars, but if Han Solo at the beginning of Star Wars is a selfish man who's only willing to take these people to Alderaan because he wants money, we have to know that at the end of the movie, he's going to selflessly risk his life to help Luke Skywalker destroy the Death Star. That's how stories work, right? So that's how our lives have to be described as well. I used to be one type of a thing or think one type of a thing, and then some stuff happens. That's the story. And therefore, I am now a new thing. Just about every story follows along that line.
And then what do we look at sort of the next part of building a story? That's often that's sort of in the beginning of a story, where we set up this opposite of the ending, so know your ending is this realization moment, but then we need to start with the opposite of that. Then when do we go after that?
So we always start at the end, like you said. We have to know the change that has taken place, right? So after we know that change, the opposite of the change is going to be the beginning of the story. And then once we're at the beginning, I always say it's a pretty precious time, the beginning of a story. It's really important to grab your audience's attention. So simple things that you can do, like start as close to the end of the story as possible. So, really push into the story as close as you can get. And that's not my rule. That's Kurt Vonnegut's rule on short story writing. And I believe it applies to the stories we tell out loud as well. So start as close to the end as possible. I tell people that they should start with location and action. The first two things out of your mouth should be location and action. Location is important because it instantly activates imagination. Location is beautiful because if I tell you I'm standing in a kitchen, you've already imagined the kitchen for me. You've either put me in your kitchen or your parents' kitchen or a kitchen you've seen on television. You've put me in the kitchen and you've created a fully realized kitchen for me. And unless the particulars of that kitchen are relevant to the story, I'm just going to let you put me in that kitchen because you can see it so clearly. So location is beautiful because it automatically comes with 1,000 adjectives attached to it. Almost every location we can mention. So we start with telling people where we are. And then I like starting with action because we want our stories to actually begin. We don't want preamble. We don't want people explaining things to us before we actually get the story going. If you've ever seen Apollo 13, the Tom Hanks movie about the lunar module that didn't make it to the moon. In order to understand that movie, you have to understand how 1960s space travel works. You have to know how that spaceship works. But the movie doesn't begin with Tom Hanks on a black screen saying, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before we begin this movie, I need to explain 1960 space travel to you." But that's how people tell stories all the time. They say things like, "Let me tell you something about my mother," which is not a story. It's just a list of stuff about your mother that no one cares about. But if you actually start the story with location and action, I'm in a place and I'm doing a thing with my mother. Now you can tell me about your mother because the story has started. So you start with some location, you start with some action, and then you start with some stakes. What is at stake for your protagonist? In this case, it's you. In other words, a stake is sort of, the audience has to either be worried about something or wondering about something. They're either worried that you're going to get out of a problem or solve a problem or fix something, or they're wondering what is going to happen next. And one of those two things has to sort of be happening for people to continue to want to listen. Otherwise, they can disengage. So you have to ask yourself, how can I make my audience worried or wondering about me the whole way through the story?
Yeah, because you mentioned about adding stakes. You talk about, and then is boring, but and therefore is storytelling.
Yeah, and therefore, really.
Yeah, can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So if we think about stories and we're telling scenes from our story, things are happening. And the scenes are, this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. Things don't feel connected in an audience's mind. It feels like any one of these moments can drop out because everything is merely connected with an and. But if I use a but or a therefore, if I say this happened, but then this happened instead, therefore this happened, but then this happened. If I connect every moment or every scene, we'll say, with a but or a therefore, it creates the chain. And it feels like every moment is important, because if you break one of those buts or therefores, you don't get to the next moment. So I like to say that stories need to have sort of an up and down flow to them. We have to be going this way, but then this way, but then this way, but then this way, rather than this happened, then this happened, then this happened. If you want an and story, you can go into a first grade classroom, because they're really good at it, those first graders. I woke up and then I had some cereal and then I got on the bus and then I came to school and then I wanted to kill you because the story is so awful, right? So buts and therefores, when you can get your story to be working in that way, is much more powerful.
You also talk about introducing the elephant, the underlying storyline. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. I guess it's the idea that your audience needs to know what your story is kind of about right from the top. You know, if you go to a movie, you see a trailer or someone tells you what the movie's about. It's rare that you go into a movie and you go, hey, I wonder if this is a romance or a superhero movie, right? You know, you have an inherent sense of where we are, what the terrain is going to be. But if I tell you, hey, let me tell you a story, you have no idea what you're about to get. Like, there's no clue in your mind what I'm going to be talking about. So the elephant is the idea that somewhere near the beginning of my story, I have to give my audience a clue as to what is at stake, what the terrain of this story is. Are we in a romance? Are we in a hijinks caper kind of story? Are we in a story where a guy's got a real problem that he needs to solve? You know, is this a Ocean's 11 kind of story? Or, you know, is this a Pretty Woman kind of story? So the elephant is sort of it's the clue to the audience that lets them know where they are, where we're going, and gives them a sense of what the direction is. And if we don't give them that, they often feel lost. When you don't give an elephant, you know, I call it an elephant because the elephant in the room is sort of the thing that everybody knows. You got to get everyone to know. Yeah. When you don't get that, what happens is, and I'm sure this has happened to you, someone's talking and you start to think like, where is this going? You know, where is this going is an indication the storyteller has not given you a clue, hasn't given you the elephant in the room to tell you where it's going. Yeah. So the elephant can be a need, a want, some sort of peril or problem, or even just a mystery. A mystery. Yeah. Those are great too. Yeah. Just sort of what is happening here? You know, I wonder what is the point of this thing that this guy is choosing to do. And if it's interesting enough, now they're wondering, they want to get to the next thing. So, yeah. Because you use an example, I'm not sure if it was in the podcast or the book, about Jurassic Park, for example. Right. You know, the story there. What do you want to tell the people what you believe the elephant is in that story? Sure. So if you've seen the movie, it's a dinosaur movie. but it's not a dinosaur movie. Because Spielberg, who made that movie, is smart enough to know that you can't just make a dinosaur movie because that has been made before. So Jurassic Park is really the story of a man who can't be with the woman he loves because the woman wants to have children and he doesn't. And so it's easy to see now that I've told you.
Yeah.
You know, in the beginning of the movie, Alan Grant and his girlfriend will say they're at a dig site and they see this dinosaur bone under the ground, and some boy comes along. There shouldn't be a boy at a archaeological dig site, but he's there.
Yeah.
And he says something like, "That looks like a giant chicken." You know, and Alan Grant says, "Yeah, that giant chicken would kill you." And he takes out this fossilized velociraptor claw, and he tells the boy how the thing would cut his belly open and start eating him while the boy was still screaming. And so then Alan Grant and his girlfriend walk away, and she says to him, she says, "Why did you do that? Why did you tell that boy that?" And he says, "That's what you want? You want one of those?" You know, and she says, "Well, I don't want that one, but yeah, I would like one of those." And there it is. That's the problem. They can't quite be together because she wants kids and he doesn't. So what happens in the movie? Alan Grant ends up in Jurassic Park with 2 children, right?
Yeah.
No one else has the kids except the 2 guy who doesn't want to have kids. And over the course of the movie, he falls in love with these kids. He's got to keep them alive. He starts to appreciate them. The boy is funny. The girl is clever. The end of the movie really happens when Alan Grant is in a tree at night and he's holding both of those kids in his arms, kids that aren't even his. And the boy makes a joke. It's the funniest joke he makes in the movie. And Alan Grant laughs at his joke and pulls the kid in as he falls asleep. And the girl says, "What if the bad dinosaurs come back tonight?" And Alan Grant says, "I'm going to stay awake all night and make sure that we're safe." And she says, "All night?" And he says, "Yes, just like a father would do."
Yeah.
And as he pulls her in close, that fossilized claw that he threatened the boy with at the very beginning of the movie, it falls out of his pocket and it hits the ground because it's no longer important. He's got the most important thing in his arms, 2 kids, and now he can be with the woman he loves. That's the story of Jurassic Park. But if Spielberg makes that movie and I say, "Hey, do you want to go see a movie about a guy who can't really be with the woman he loves because she wants to have kids and he doesn't?" You'd say, "No, thank you."
Yeah.
But if we embed that real story into a dinosaur story, now you want to be there. And you might not even notice it. You might not really see that story. But what I think is you leave that movie thinking that was a good movie, because somewhere in the back of your brain, that story sort of tickled all of those important parts of your brain. You recognized, even if it's an unconscious level, that just wasn't a dinosaur movie only. That stuff really happened in that movie. Small stuff, right? One of those small stories. The dinosaurs are the big stories that get you to come in and buy the popcorn. But the small story about a man who wants to be with the woman he loves, but they each want a different thing. That's an everyday story that Spielberg puts in there and makes that movie amazing.
It changes the way you look at the movies. I think unfortunately, this book has, and your podcast has destroyed all movies for me, but it's a good thing because it's allowed me to think critically about whether the movie's actually any good or not. You know, like if you can see it cliched coming, you sort of think, "Oh, this is going to be a good movie," because you can kind of like, you know, it's following the same rules to what a good movie is going to be like, you know. If it doesn't, then you know, you get a little upset, you get a little worried, like, is this worth my time? So
yeah, you got to feel like you're in good hands. Yeah, you want to know that your storyteller is taking good care of you.
I wanted to touch a little bit on stakes. We talked just briefly about it earlier, about the, you know, but therefore, what is stakes, and then what are the tools we can use to, you know, allow the audience to feel stakes, I guess, in a story?
Well, some stories just have stakes. You know, you're blessed with a story where, you know, I tell a story about being in a chase with the police. I try to outrun the police. There's stakes. I don't need to do anything in that story to add stakes because I'm trying to outrun the police. So I'm good to go. Like, everyone's going to understand what's at peril, and I don't need to raise the stakes in any way. But lots of our stories do need the stakes raised, like Jurassic Park. The way Spielberg raises the stakes on a simple love story is he puts dinosaurs around them.
Yeah.
And so The first thing we have to do is we have to identify what the real stakes of the story are. Sometimes they don't come till later in a story. And so we have to be aware if they're coming later in a story, we have to provide the audience with something in the beginning to keep them going. The other problem that people will sometimes make is they'll sort of figure out what's at stake, and there'll be a few things, and they'll pile them all in the front in hopes that, like, if I tell you everything that's going to be a problem, you'll want to hear the rest of the story, when that's not really true. The best way to do it is to sort of, here's a stake, and now start telling the story. And then raise the stakes with your second stake after a minute or two. And then your third stake, sort of spread them out throughout the story, because that's what movies do. They don't open up the story with, well, here's all the things that's going to happen. They're going to fight this dinosaur and this, right? Those moments are revealed to us slowly, and things get worse and worse. So we want to do that. Sometimes we just have stakes to work with, like I said, and that's great. If we don't, we can sort of like play tricks with our audience to get them to be wondering, or to be getting them to hope and believe in us. So, I use tricks like a backpack is something I use very often. A backpack is the idea that if we load onto our audience all of our hopes and dreams, all of our emotions, before we move forward into whatever situation we're moving forward into, they're going to be with us emotionally and mentally. They're going to be hoping for us and praying for us. Backpacks work really well when we're sort of formulating a plan. I'm going to ask that girl to go to the prom with me, and here's how I'm going to do it. And they give us all the steps, and they talk about why it's important. You do that before you go ask the girl. That way, as you're walking to ask the girl to the prom, I understand what you're planning, and I understand what you're feeling, and now I'm with you. The Ocean's 11 movies do this really well. They explain to you how they're going to rob the casino before they rob the casino. And the effect of that is when things go badly, they're going badly. When you see someone like alter or deviate from the plan, you're thinking like, what are you doing? I know the plan, and this is going to create a problem. But you feeling that makes the movie great. So a backpack is just a way to get the audience on board with you by saying, here's how I feel, and here's what I'm planning to do. Now let's go see if it happens. Right. And so the audience wants to be with you the whole time. So you loaded all of those emotions and hopes onto their back.
Yeah, because laying out the plan, I can imagine in, like, for example, a maker video would be also highly engaging, because
that'd be great.
Everyone knows that making stuff that you've never made before never goes to plan. So when you tell people the plan you're going to go through, everyone sees you making mistakes and goes, how is he going to fix this problem? Because that's not his plan.
Yeah. There's a NASA guy on YouTube, Mark Rober, I think his name is.
Yeah.
Yeah. He does this brilliantly. My son loves his videos, and my students do too. But what he does is he lays out what his plan is going to be. He says, here's what I plan on doing. And then when things go wrong along the way, it's really fun to watch him both encounter the problem and then have to somehow work around the problem. So I'm in full agreement. If you explain to people what you plan on doing, knowing especially that things are not going to go right, that there's absolutely going to be problems along the way, and you're going to have to find your way through them, that's a great way to get people invested in what the process is.
So there you go, guys. Something to think about. Have a look at maybe Mark Rober's videos. He does it really well. Also, I Did a Thing. He also does really great storytelling as well. And of course, check out Garage Avenger, because I heard that guy's really good at storytelling now. But there are a couple of little tricks, and maybe they might be a bit too much to go into, maybe. But you have some tools that you use for adding stakes into things, such as crystal balls, breadcrumbs, hourglasses, and that sort of thing. Would you care to explain some of those?
Sure. So breadcrumbs are the idea that in stories, sometimes we give a clue as to what's coming without giving the whole thing away. That causes the audience to wonder. If you're making something, for example, and you've encountered a problem and you sort of understand what you're going to do to solve the problem, perhaps you just give the audience like an idea of one part of the solution. So, I know I'm going to have to use this tool, but you don't explain what you're going to do with the tool. That's a breadcrumb. That's the causing the audience to go, how's he going to use that to solve the problem, right? MacGyver, right? The TV show from the 1980s is a perfect example of that, right? Give me some gum, give me a block of wood, and give me a piece of glass, and I'm going to make a bomb that's going to get us out of this situation. But we don't know it's going to be a bomb. He just collects a whole bunch of stuff and starts making something, and the audience goes, what is he making from all of this junk, right? So you can do that. That's a great way of using a breadcrumb. A crystal ball is the idea of just making a prediction. Human beings are prediction machines. Once a prediction is made, we sort of need to know if it's going to come true. In your case, in making something, all you have to do is say, well, I'm going to do this, and this is what I think is going to happen. As soon as you say, this is what I think is going to happen, the audience is also saying, I think that's going to happen too, or you're crazy, that's never going to happen. But either way, now that they're also invested in the prediction, they want to continue watching. They want to continue seeing what's going to happen. So you making a prediction, a crystal ball, like fortune tellers, causes your audience to also simultaneously make a prediction and want to be with you. And then hourglasses, those are those, you flip them upside down and let the time run. That's just the idea that when you reach a moment in a story, when you know everyone wants to hear the next sentence, they can't wait to find out the culminating moment, you flip the hourglass and you make them wait. That's television when sort of, they've finished making the meal on one of those food cooking shows, but before you get to see the judges determine whether they like it or not, or you find the judges' scores, they go to commercial. They flipped the hourglass and they've made you wait in suspense before we find out the results of the competition. In storytelling, though, it can just be like in my car chase story, when the police chase me, when the police are closing in and I have an opportunity to perhaps escape or not, that's when I'm going to slow the story down. I'm going to be overly detailed. I'm going to speak slower. I'm going to repeat things that I would never normally repeat. I know the audience is desperate to find out what's going to happen next. And so I'm going to make them wait as long as possible.
Yeah, I think these are all tools that I am learning to try and roll into my content. And I know I use crystal balls every so often, maybe not as effectively as I could. And breadcrumbs, I also have tried including them in my videos. I don't think I've pulled off an hourglass, that's for sure. in my
well,
video.
Get some commercials in your videos, and then you can go to commercial and then come back.
Well, I mean, thinking about hourglass, they often do that in competition shows where they like just show their faces of the other contestants for just slightly too much time.
Right.
And people are just like, come on, just tell me who won, who got the best foot. Yeah. And in my opinion, that's kind of using an hourglass to like stretch it out so that people are in suspense waiting for the result or the answer.
It can also just be as simple as like those glass blowers I saw in Bermuda. If he's like doing something with glass and he's on video and he drops it and it breaks, it's just as simple as allowing it to fall in slow motion, right? The same way the Matrix slows down bullets in their movie to increase the suspense of whether Neo is going to be hit by the bullet that's coming at him very slowly. Just slowing things down when there's a moment of wonder with the actual video will create those hourglasses and cause people to lean in.
Oh, that's great stuff, Matt. Really good. I wanted to touch on the don'ts of storytelling, because we can tell everyone how to tell a good story, but they'll still slip into the don'ts. So I think it's a good thing to learn about. What are the don'ts of storytelling?
There's 1,000 of them. Some that come to mind immediately. I was at a show in New York last night, so all the don'ts I heard last night are foremost in my mind. I guess the biggest don't I hear is that idea of providing exposition at the top of a story rather than starting the story. Also, people are often fond of like saying something profound at the top of a story, like, there's only two kinds of people in this world. There are people I want to be with and people I don't. And then they start telling the story. That sentence is lost to everyone. No one remembers it. It doesn't mean anything. And yet, why would you use such precious real estate as the top of a story to say something completely forgettable? I think things like drinking stories are not really stories that people want to hear. It's hard to tell a good story about a time you were drunk. You might have one, you might have a couple, but those are stories you kind of want to avoid for the most part. They're great for like entertaining your friends, but not causing people to remember you in a deep and meaningful way. I try to avoid stories where things are getting wrapped up in a perfect bow. We often don't need a perfect bow. People often feel like they need to tie off every little thing. I like keeping people wondering about the story a little bit. I like to leave a little mystery at the end of a story. I think that's why their minds return to a story, because there's a little bit left that they still want to know about. I think that's a great way to end a story. So tying things off too quickly is unfortunate. And I think you have to be really, really careful with the language you use, probably for your folks too, people who are making things, especially if you want new viewers. We make enormous assumptions that what we're talking about, people understand, and oftentimes they don't. And because we're speaking, people have to either keep up with what we're saying or sort of pause a video and think about it, which they often won't do. In a book, they will. In a book, you can pause reading. It's just a normal thing that we do. We pause and think, but not in a video and not if we're performing live. So we have to make sure that we're defining our terms at all times. We have to make sure we're lowering the language that we're speaking. Try to speak with the most simple words possible, assuming that people aren't dumb, but they just never have this experience that we think they have. It's called the curse of knowledge. It's impossible to understand what someone else doesn't understand. Once you know how to add 2 + 2, it's impossible to understand why a 5-year-old can't also do that. You can't remember not understanding it. And that's the problem, especially with people who have specialties. It's impossible for them to understand why someone wouldn't know the name of this or how this is made or what this process means. So we have to be really careful in those things. I heard a woman once say, my father looked a little bit like Ronald Reagan, which I thought to myself, well, first of all, a lot of people in this room don't know what Ronald Reagan looks like because they're all like 30 and they never saw him in their life. And also, it's impossible to imagine someone who kind of looks like Ronald Reagan. The only thing you can do is make the father look like Ronald Reagan in your mind. And now Ronald Reagan is in the story. And that's weird. So don't use, cultural or political references if you can avoid it, because the way our culture is so skewed nowadays, whatever that is, Forge of Fire, right? Some people know it and think it's crazy that we don't know it. And yet we don't know anything about it. And that's how everything is in the world. So we can't assume that people know things ever. So I try to keep things as understandable as possible for all people.
Yeah, I think what I was trying to come up with is if we're dropping cultural references and things like that, or not everyone is going to know what you're talking about.
Right.
And that can confuse people, which makes them think about what you're saying and stops the story basically in their heads.
It does. It makes them feel excluded too, like they're an outsider, like they're not cool. I mentioned Han Solo in this podcast. I know when I say it, it's a little dangerous. It's why I use Han Solo in Jurassic Park instead of more niche movies, which would also work. I just try to talk about really big movies that, hopefully encompass more people. But even when I say Han Solo, I go, there's like 9 people who don't understand what I'm talking about here. And I'm sorry.
Yeah. Screw those 9 people who don't know who
No, I
Solo
want them all.
is.
I want everybody to feel included in my stories. But if you're going to use movies as references, which I believe are very powerful in storytelling, it's unavoidable, except that I try to choose the movies that people are most likely to be knowledgeable about.
Now, in your podcast, Speak Up, you and your wife would often review stories recorded at events such as the Moth Grand Slam and even at your own storytelling events. And I always learned so much more from hearing you guys break down the story and hear what they did right and where they could improve. And I felt I couldn't expect people to understand how they could improve their storytelling without putting kind of my work on the chopping block. So I asked you nervously to have a look at my latest YouTube video, The Lazy Susan 2.0. And I was wondering if you could deconstruct it and tell us what was done right, and most probably what can be improved.
I feel terrible. I didn't watch it.
Do you want to watch
totally
it now?
Forgot. Yeah, I'll watch it right now. Yeah, I would love to. I know I feel terrible. I'm like, that's right. It was on my. Yes, let's watch it right now. I'm just going to go to YouTube. All right. What's the title of it? What'd you call it?
Lazy Susan 2.0.
Susan 2.0. All right. I can actually critique it in real time for you.
I'd love this.
Oh, there it is. Yes. Okay. You know what? This was sitting on my desktop. I feel bad. This was sitting on my desktop, but I didn't know why. I was like, why is this on my desktop? All right, here we go.
When I moved to beautiful Norway 9 years ago, I thought this place was amazing.
Stunning landscapes, and you're showing the bodies of these people is funny.
Universal health care, paid maternity leave, even for men, low crime rates. Yeah, I thought this has to be one of the best countries in the world. That wasn't until I had the displeasure of experiencing the god-awful Norwegian arm. What is the Norwegian arm?
Wait a minute, am I watching the right one, the Norwegian arm? No, I'm watching Fixing the Norwegian Arm. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
Oh, okay. It's hilarious, first of all. Congratulations. If we're funny in the beginning of our story, it causes the audience to feel like we're in good hands. And I feel like I'm already in good hands.
That's think good. It's impolite to use words to ask for things. So they reach across you and even stand up to reach across the dinner table.
I understand where this is going now.
Don't get me wrong, there are some advantages. But most of the time, it's an absolutely horrible experience. So how am I going to fix this cultural defect? Well, I've engineered my way out of problems before, so I'll have to invent something to disarm the repulsive Norwegian arm and revert mealtimes in Norway back to a civilized dining experience.
So I'm moving into the actual build now. I'll say it's not the first. I told you you're funny, and that's very good at the beginning.
Yeah.
I might be careful. The sexual innuendo that you have in the video so far.
Yeah.
I'd be worried that I'm pushing away female viewers to a certain degree.
100% agree.
Yeah. So I would be careful for that. But otherwise, I'm loving every minute of it.
Right. How are we going to fix this Norwegian arm? Well, I've been inspired by the Japanese. They've already solved
this is great.
Yes. I'm going to build a sushi train that fits right in the middle of my table. So I headed off to the internet to buy some parts to make this.
Well, this is some backpack right here.
Right, just going to add this.
Enough. No more shopping.
What am I supposed to do now?
Yeah, this is some.
Got enough in that garage. Go figure it out.
Okay, maybe she's.
Is that your wife?
Spending a bit of money on these.
Yeah. Is that your wife?
But lucky for me, Norwegians are super
great.
rich and they throw perfectly good things away.
What's that?
Who would seriously throw such a good sandwich away? It's.
Oh, that's so wrong.
You're eating the sandwich.
Okay, so
funny.
maybe Norwegians aren't that rich. But nevertheless, I always have something lying around because I always buy too much crap, whether it's stuff from my sofa beer fridge or the Batmobile. So let's see what I got.
Okay, here's a thought that I'm having now.
Yep.
In terms of building the wonder, I think Lazy Susan 2.0 might be giving away where you're headed. I'm not sure. I'm wondering, which is a good thing. But if you land on Lazy Susan, I'm going to feel a little disappointed that I knew it right from the start.
Yeah, I don't call it a sushi train though.
You call it a sushi train in the video.
Yeah, I do call it a sushi train in the video, but the title is, I guess, a modified version of the Lazy Susan.
I see.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I couldn't tell if we were going to go from sushi train to an actual Lazy Susan or not. But all right, I'm going to keep watching. I'm wondering, so that's a really good sign.
This is fun.
You're missing this.
So it's good. You're doing that thing we talked about, which is showing stuff, but not really explaining to me how this stuff is going to be put together right away. And It's that breadcrumb, like, here's a thing, and I'm going to be able to do something with it, but I'm not going to explain it yet. These are good breadcrumbs along the way. I'm thinking, what's he going to do with this stuff? Music's good.
And it didn't work.
And it didn't work.
Swish.
See,
Now, there was no reason to reinvent the wheel. Instead, I came up with this design, a kind of wooden chain. I reckon it's going to do the trick.
jeez.
Now I've just got to cut out 280 individual parts on the inverted spinning death machine.
You do work I could never do. The fact you have to make 280 parts would kill me. I just can't do this kind of work. I can't build anything with my hands. Like, my hands don't do anything.
There had to be a better way.
Oh, there had to be a better way. Oh, good.
And there was. But Kristen wasn't going to like it.
She wasn't gonna like it.
What do you want?
Was this person? I just met this guy, this bald man. Is he a recurring character in your videos, or is he new?
He has shown up in a couple of them.
Okay, that's good. I always tell people when they're making YouTube videos to expand your universe and let us get to know the characters, because I just think that that is a better storytelling. You know, sort of the sitcom method, like, you know, the neighbor across the street who shows up in every third episode makes us feel like the world is more
Bigger than it is. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So thanks to my mate Jürgen.
Oh, he has a machine.
My fingers and my dignity by getting him to CNC all the parts out.
It is good for
It's always great to have a friend with tools, especially one that never asks anything in return.
Thank you so much. What can I do to repay you? Anything else?
Yeah, you're in the shower. It's very funny. You're very, very funny.
I'm overcompensating for my lack of skill. So excited. I had a little accident.
You know, the thing is too, as I'm watching this, and you're funny. You know, we spoke for an hour and I wouldn't have known that you were this funny, which is a good sign to people, because I think sometimes people think they can only be funny like if they're naturally funny, and that funny people are funny all the time. Like, you weren't really funny during our conversation.
No,
but you understand how humor works. You know, you can't always deploy it throughout your entire life or in an interview. But you've sort of figured it out here in a really good way.
Serious person.
And you've got your kids here now, which is great, expanding the universe.
Yeah.
Kids are always cute.
That's true.
No, it's great. Kids are great.
About 60 more to go, kids.
I mean, by the time they're 15, they're not going to let you in the videos anymore, or let them. They're not going to allow themselves to be in the videos.
Closer inspection, their work wasn't quite up to scratch.
Jeez.
So I ended up taking back over and have to face the music and do it myself.
I'm watching you build the train now.
Yeah, it started to look pretty pimp. I was so stoked. Something was actually working.
So I don't know what's going to happen yet, but here's what just happened in the video. You said I was so stoked, everything's working, and you're going, yes, yes, yes. Now in a movie, my son would turn to me and go, Dad, this is the moment when all things are going to go to hell. Because that's typically what happens in a story, is the moment when the protagonist feels that they've finally achieved the goal they're trying to achieve, that's when everything breaks. So I'm curious if that's going to happen in this video. We'll see.
And now I had to work out how to drive this motor to drive this drive gear. So I jumped on the Google machine and searched motor control and found this legit YouTuber, Electro Boom. He seems to know what he's doing. I stole some code, uploaded it onto my Arduino, then programmed this blip.
You've got a Matrix reference in here that the Matrix is back.
Yeah. Despite wiring in the motor backwards, it worked as it should, but the motor just had no torque. I mean,
yeah, so good.
Didn't want to talk.
You've built this motor, but it doesn't work.
I know you want to talk. Don't resist like you made ohms.
Several bad puns later, the motor still didn't have any torque. So I was on a mission to find a solution.
There's a lot of wonder in this, which is really great. You knocked your kid off the bike. It's funny.
It's a Grand Theft Auto reference.
Sure, my son won't mind. Now, I couldn't use the motor from this thing, but could I?
Wow, you're taking it apart.
According to my Sydney public education, this should increase our talk by about 300. No.
Your production values are very good too.
All right, it was time to get on with this and get this project moving.
You know, as I'm watching it, this is not storytelling per se. It kind of is though. I'm noticing like you're building it and you have to record what you're building too. Like you've got double the job that anyone else would have. Like every screw you put in, you have to position the camera to record the screwing of the screw.
Yeah.
It makes everything more challenging, but it's also that great behind the scenes kind of thing that we talked about. I mean, this is a perfect example of it really, because, you know, I'm pretty close to seeing the final product here. But if the video had just been the final product, like Starry Night, like we started with, you know, I would be like, yeah, that's neat. But because I get to see it being built, and because I'm getting to know you as a father and a husband and a guy who has a friend,
I know what she said.
it just means so much more.
Money. But she didn't say anything about using money. And I needed a cheap alternative to bearings to make this thing roll around. And it just so happened that the Norwegian kroner.
The Norwegian kroner.
But I was going to need a lot more than the 7 kroners in my daughter's piggy bank to make this thing work. So
Wow, so you had a call back to the piggy bank.
And to my surprise,
I saw the piggy bank
came
early.
through.
It made me wonder, what is he going to do with the piggy bank? And now it pays off. Very good. That's great. When we do that too, storytellers do it when we sort of bring back the things from the beginning of our story and make references to them at the end. It makes the audience feel like every moment of the story was important, that I didn't waste any time, that you didn't offer me any fluff. That's really great.
But here's the question. Have I fixed the Norwegian?
Good to know.
Have you fixed the Norwegian arm? It looks good. Wow, look at that. And now the family's sitting back down to a meal. It is kind of like a Lazy Susan, but not really. So the title's okay. The title works. You look very happy. The guy reaches across and she... So this is a good thing. So, you know, we're watching your Lazy Susan 2.0 and everyone's reaching over you. One of the things in storytelling that people like is small progress, incremental progress.
Yeah.
They don't believe in like large, enormous leaps. Those are hard things to understand, but a small bit of progress like this, you made a thing and it still isn't quite working for you. It's great.
I think the project was a success. I mean, I've got my own sushi train.
You have your own sushi train.
What you guys probably didn't realize is this project took me nearly a year on and off to complete.
I was just going to ask you how long it took.
Essentially just a
I'm wondering if,
Susan.
because you just mentioned it took about a year off and on. I'm wondering if embedding the amount of time into the actual video would be more interesting to see how much time is going by. It might raise the stakes to understand how long you've invested in this thing. But you did answer the question right at the moment I wanted it answered. And that's the end. That was great. All right. I'm coming back to Zoom so I can see you. Oh, look, it got dark in my house while I was watching that video. There's no light on in here. It's fine. All right. Yeah, that was great. I would say that was pretty fantastic, actually. I don't have a lot of complaints about that. The sexual innuendos I would absolutely remove to increase your audience's appreciation of it. And I think you used a lot of the strategies that I talk about in that video. I thought that was really pretty fantastic.
Thank you. I have a format based off your book that I use for every video. And I outline when I start building the project, I start looking at the buts and therefores.
Yeah.
constantly. And that seems to be working well for me in the way to story tell. So like I'll hit a roadblock in the project and I'll think, okay, so I've got this, but, and then what's my therefore? I had to do
Right.
this, right? And then how do I story tell that to keep the audience interested in the journey? So it's a constant like evolving thing, because you can't sort of write a full script to a
Right. While you're
project
making it.
whilst you're making it.
Yeah.
But like on the fly, you're constantly thinking about mainly those questions, like the but therefore question, and how am I going to tell that to keep the stakes high in this project and keep my audience guessing. And so I use a lot of the things, or nearly all of them, that you've mentioned in your book to try and help me improve my storytelling, and make me stand out from others that do things, that make things as well, but perhaps don't storytell in the same style. So
Yeah.
it's
very good. Yeah, it's clear that you've done your homework, because it's very, very good. And it held my attention. I don't make stuff. My hands can't build a single thing. I have hinges in my house that I have to have a handyman come in and put the hinge in. I can't do anything. And yet I was highly entertained and constantly wondering what was going to happen next. So bravo. I don't offer compliments easily, by the way. My wife will tell you, like, if I saw problems, I would have clearly told you what those problems were. That was a really well told story.
Thank you. Really, really. I was super scared. I was like, I was thinking, what is he going to destroy me on? Like,
all right. Well, well done, sir. Very, very well done.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. So for those who, are listening, it does work. Even Matthew Dix says it works. So, maybe something to look at, guys. Before we go into the Rapid Fire 5, I want to thank my patrons. I want to thank them for supporting me, because they honestly mean more to me than they know, especially my top tiers, heroes, Stian Sohus, Sylvester Arneson, Andreas Volman, Ryan Wilson, and a big thank you to my new patron, Kristen White. Yes, that's my wife.
I was going to say, isn't that your wife?
She is so dedicated and supportive of me. She's willing to give me my own money and get taxed on it, so therefore get less money in the end. That she's willing to sign up for Patreon and show me how much she supports me. So I'm very, very, very thankful for her. Guys, if you want to be weird like Kristen and support me, please head over to Patreon. There is a link in the show notes. Now, let's get on with the Rapid Fire 5 for Matthew Dix. Here we go. What is something people get wrong about you?
They think that I sort of don't sleep in order to get everything done that I get done. Instead, I structure my life in a highly productive way. My next book is about that process. So you can sleep a reasonable amount of time and still get a lot done.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Because I think people think they don't have a lot of time, but if they actually look at it, a lot of the time they just sit around watching TV or something like that.
That's the topic of my next book.
Yeah, awesome. What's something you like doing that has nothing to do with storytelling?
It's such a hard question, because I can tell a story about just about anything, that I want to tell a story about. So that's really hard. I guess the thing I like to do that's a little odd, but, I like organization an enormous amount. So, for me, sort of like emptying the refrigerator is deeply satisfying, like clearing out all the things that need to be cleared out, and oddly doing the laundry and getting all of that done is deeply satisfying to me. So the chores of my home that make the home look the way I want it to is unrelated to storytelling entirely. And yet it is something I sort of enjoy.
I don't think we can be friends. They're my pet.
Well, you can be friends with Alicia.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I guess the one I've been given is that great people don't wait for the right time to do something. They make the time and they just do it. So rather than organizing everything and getting everything perfect before you sort of launch something, launching is better.
Great. This is the question a lot of people seem to struggle with on this podcast. What does happiness look like?
For me, happiness is when I put my head on the pillow at the end of the day. I can look back on my day and I have to struggle like hell to find a minute that was not spent either in the company of people I love or in the process of doing work that I care about.
I hear you there. That sounds like my version of happiness. And the last question, who should be the next guest on this podcast?
Oh, I guess my wife. Well, I don't know why it should be her, but I think I'm so blessed to have her in my life as my primary counsel. And what happens is I do a lot of podcasts and interviews, and people always seem to want to know what I'm thinking about. And I always think like, I'm standing next to somebody who's really supporting me in an enormous way. And oftentimes she's my silent partner. I mean, she's not silent when we're podcasting, let's say, but that's her sort of just putting her stuff out in the world. People don't ask her a lot of questions like they ask me. People seem to want to know, how did you do that? Why did you do that? How can I do that? I ask her those questions all the time, but nobody else seems to want to know. So my wife is a great person to have a conversation with. I can't recommend a better person.
Perhaps my wife can interview your wife.
That might make for a very interesting podcast.
That's it. So thank you so much, Matt, for coming on the show. It's been absolute pleasure. I'm very, very grateful you did not destroy my latest project video. In fact, I'm kind of chuffed at my review that I've gotten from you. Where can people find you in the world if they want to look you up?
They can just go to Speak Up, or they can go to Speak Up Storytelling, which is our podcast, which you can find anywhere. But if you just go to MatthewDix.com, everything is findable on that website.
Fantastic. I'm going to leave you with an ominous quote from Matthew's book, Storyworthy. Am I more compelling than video games, pizza, or sex at this moment? If the answer to any of these questions is no, you need to raise the stakes to tell a better story. Something to think about for your next project or video. Your projects are special because they're yours, but with all the noise around, making your work seen and heard is becoming ever more difficult. That's why I believe storytelling is a great tool to cut through the noise. I hope you got something valuable from this episode, and perhaps you'll find a place on your tool wheel for storytelling. I'm Justin White. Thank you for listening. Until next time, keep pushing yourself, keep ballsing up things, keep learning, get inspired, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Here we go. We're out.
All right. That was great, man.